Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Megan Williams, and I'm the Director of Support Services at Alzheimer Groupe. If you're joining us for the first time, Alzheimer Groupe is a charitable organization that offers therapeutic programs to individuals living with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Additionally, AGI provides support services to families and professional caregivers, focusing on best practices of dementia care, while sensitizing the community at large through education and awareness. Today's lecture is made possible by the generous support of the Lindsay Memorial Foundation and the Lasner Learning Center. Just to let everyone know, we will be keeping all of the questions till the end of the lecture today, and we will rest assured that this is recorded and you will be receiving a copy of the recording if you've registered. Without further ado, let's begin today's lecture. I'd like to introduce Brittany Clark and Paula-Jane Bellizzi from Evergreen Communication Therapy. They will talk about a life participation approach to understanding and supporting people with aphasia and PPA. So welcome, ladies.
Thanks so much, Megan, for that lovely introduction. And we're really happy to be here. Thank you so much to the Alzheimer Groupe for having us here today. But just to, again, thanks, Megan introduced us already, but again, my name's Brittany Clark. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I'm the clinical director of the Halton-Peel community aphasia programs and the co-founder of Evergreen Communication Therapy. And I'm really excited to be here with my colleague, Paula-Jane.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Paula-Jane Bellizzi, and I'm the social worker for the Halton-Peel Community Aphasia Programs and Evergreen Communication Therapy. So my role is to provide both one-on-one support to people with different types of aphasia, as well as caregivers, and I also run monthly support groups. And I'm thrilled to be with you today.
Thanks. Just in essence, who we are, Paula-Jane and myself and our team, we're passionate aphasia advocates, and we all work together to make communication easier. So we're here today to talk about aphasia. So with people with aphasia, they typically know more than they can say. Usually, most often, aphasia is caused by a stroke or a brain injury, but it can also be caused by a brain disorder. And again, the aphasia masks that person's inherent competence. So they might know what they want to say, but the words don't always come out, or they might not come out the right way. A person with aphasia can have difficulty understanding conversation, so getting those messages in, and they may need their partner to speak more slowly to understand their message a little bit better. They might have difficulty reading. Again, taking that message in. They also might have difficulty getting their messages out. So they might have trouble talking or writing, texting, or even emailing. Our talk today, though, will focus on a specific type of aphasia known as primary progressive aphasia, which is a neurodegenerative brain condition. PPA is a type of dementia, and it can make it hard to speak, to understand, to read, and to write. The definition of PPA is actually found in the name itself when we look at the individual pieces. So starting at the bottom, we have the word aphasia. And we know that aphasia is a language impairment. Then we look at the next word, which is progressive. So it does get worse over time. And then we have the word primary. Here, primary, it means the impairment is primarily within the language domain, while the other areas like memory and personality are not as affected in those early stages. So primarily, the language impairment is the impairment that presents the most. And so often it can be really difficult to diagnose PPA because it is the primary symptom. And often people think, maybe I'm just forgetting my words, or I must just be getting a little bit older. And those symptoms can start out small, but they do become worse over time. So again, the primary symptom is that with that language processing, and the difficulty is with finding the words. So when we look at the cause of PPA, typically aphasia is caused by a stroke or a brain injury or some sort of head trauma to the language center of the brain. But with PPA, it's different. So with PPA, the cause is actually a buildup of proteins caused by either Alzheimer's disease or frontotemporal lobar degeneration, also known as FTLD. There are 3 different types of PPA, and though it's beyond the scope of this presentation to describe those unique types and the unique presentations of each, it can be important to speak to your neurologist or your speech language pathologist about your diagnosis, because it can help to know what symptoms to expect as the disease progresses. So those 3 types are the logopenic variant, the non-fluent variant, and the semantic variant. People with PPA in general tend to have problems with either finding the words, so they know, but they can't say. They may have difficulty pronouncing or articulating the words. So again, they know, but the speech sounds themselves don't come out the way that they want them to. Some people with PPA have difficulty understanding the meaning of words and concepts. And for some, it might be more difficult concepts. And for some, it might even be more common items. They might forget or have difficulty understanding the meaning of those words. But it's important to remember that no 2 people are exactly the same with PPA. Over time, as the disease progresses, individuals can also experience other difficulties, like difficulties with swallowing, movement deficits. They may lose their balance or fall easily. So you may consider a referral to a falls prevention program in the community, for example. Over time, you might see personality changes, cognitive changes, and for some people, mutism, which means they may eventually lose their ability to speak verbally.
So I saw in the chat that somebody was asking for us to speak up. So thank you for letting us know. So I'm going to talk right into my microphone. So if you're still having difficulty, please let us know in the chat again, okay?
Thank you. And I can speak up as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, typically, a diagnosis of PPA is made by a neurologist, but it can often take some time to get that confirmed diagnosis. And when people are diagnosed, there can be different reactions to the diagnosis, and many things affect a person's ability to adapt and cope. And these include personality and previous experiences, understanding of PPA, social and emotional support received, and the environment. So as you can imagine, when people get this diagnosis, they often have different emotions. So some people will feel sadness, anger, confusion, and worry. However, everyone reacts differently. Because it can take time to get a diagnosis, some people actually express feelings of relief. Because once the diagnosis is confirmed, they then can educate themselves and seek out proper support. Many people with PPA are aware and insightful regarding their diagnosis. So for many, they're willing and able to share about their diagnosis with others, and they want to do that. However, for many others, it may be hard to acknowledge the changes in their communication. And for that reason and other reasons, some people choose to be very private about their diagnosis. because PPA falls under the umbrella of frontal temporal lobe dementia, it's considered an early onset dementia, so many people diagnosed with PPA are actually under the age of 65. So because of this, and definitely early on after the diagnosis, many people with PPA can still drive, maintain hobbies, and take care of themselves. However, over time, as the condition progresses, it will affect activities of daily living. So as cognitive abilities change and memory changes happen, people will begin to have difficulties with such things as self-care, driving, and continue to have impairment with language. So family support is really key because PPA, like all types of aphasia, impacts the whole family. So a person's sense of identity, how we see ourselves, is shaped by many things. It's shaped by our relationships with others, by our role in our family and in our communities, by our hobbies, and also by our occupations. So changes in an individual's abilities caused by PPA may result in changes to their sense of identity and how they see themselves. So it's really important that family members are aware of this, as they have an important role to play, so they can influence how a person with PPA sees themselves. So it's really critical that family members treat the person with PPA as an intelligent, competent individual, rather than defining them by their condition. And this is something we often emphasize when we work with people with different types of aphasia and their families, and certainly in our trainings, that the person is still intelligent and still important to include them in the conversation and in decision making. So as the social worker, running a PPA support group, one of the activities that we have done in our group is to have our members create poems about themselves. So we used one of our sessions to help people create these poems, really the purpose being to help them reveal their competence and their sense of identity. And I'm going to read one of the poems created by one of our members. I am a daughter and a health caregiver. I wonder about what research and treatment will be available for PPA. I want to not be a burden to anybody. I feel fortunate and unfortunate. I try to do the best I can for as long as I can. I am a daughter and a health caregiver. So this member of our program and of our group, so for her, her sense of identity was very much based on being a healthcare provider. So she's a retired physiotherapist and spent over 30 years supporting others and helping others. So for her, that is really critical to her sense of identity and who she is. So part of our focus and role is helping her to continue to feel that she is helping others. And we've done that in part by matching her with other people with PPA to provide peer one-to-one support, where they connect for weekly conversation and support. So in that way, she's still able to feel that she's helping others and she has a sense of purpose. As you can also see, one of her concerns is not wanting to be a burden to anybody. And we hear about this often in our programs because a lot of people that we work with, they are aware of their limitations, and they're also aware of the impact on that on the family as a whole.
So when thinking about goals for a person living with PPA, it's really important to focus on enhancing quality of life. Part of that involves maintaining daily life and communication skills, preserving social connections, and of course, prolonging independence. So we want to maintain these skills for as long as possible. We want to encourage the person with PPA to communicate in other ways that come naturally or easily to them, like maybe gesturing. So we have clients who, the words don't come out as easily, so they might give us a thumbs up when they're saying, yep, I'm okay. Pointing to things around them or pointing to pictures, whatever comes easily or naturally to them. And learning and using those new ways to communicate in conversation. Another really important piece is training family members in supported conversation for adults with aphasia, also known as SCA. So this training is provided by a number of different programs, comes out of the Aphasia Institute in Toronto, and they certainly have a lot of training for professionals and family members in SCA. It's also something that we do as part of our programs. So I do encourage you to seek out that supported conversation for adults with aphasia if you are providing support to someone with PPA to learn some of those tools. For us, that's part of a much longer presentation. So we'll be touching on some of those tools in here, but again, it's a little bit beyond the time that we have today. So I encourage you to look at the SCA training if that's of interest to you. Communication is the essence of life and really the essence of our relationships. So learning those supportive conversation strategies really does lead to better conversations. And better conversations, we know, leads to better feelings about one another. And of course, better relationships. We often get clients who will say, people stopped phoning me. My friends stopped calling. They stopped coming around because they don't know how to have a conversation with me. They don't know how to act when the wrong word comes out. And so they stop. And I think that's a natural human reaction to be afraid and not know what to do. So again, learning those supported conversation strategies can really make the world of a difference. Remember that communication, it's part of a partnership, right? There's two people, a listener and a speaker, and often those roles go back and forth. So just some general tips when you're communicating with someone with dementia or PPA. Consider your purpose or your agenda for the conversation. Be an active listener and really listening to what they're saying, not necessarily, sometimes again, the wrong words might come out. So give that person extra time. Give them time to listen and time to respond. Understand the strengths and limitations of both yourself as the communication partner and the person you're speaking with. There are some simple things that you can do to set the stage for better conversations. And so distracting background noise, for one, turn off the TV or the radio. That can be really difficult for someone who has difficulty processing language if there's lots of background noise. So find a quiet place to talk. Again, we have clients who will tell us if there's more than one person in the room, then they start talking to each other and I'm left out. So, consider that when you're having an important discussion. Remember to give each person their turn, or consider maybe finding a quieter place to talk one-on-one. Also consider the time of day. Again, it's unique to the individual, but many people will say, I'm much better in the mornings. So save your important conversations for those times. Or some people will say, I need to take my rest in the afternoon. And so give them that time. Encourage the existing skills. Know the person and see what is really a strength for them. So for example, the woman actually in this photo, the woman in this photograph is a person with PPA. And she was trying to tell us that she was getting out all of her winter wear. It was getting colder, and she was trying to think of the word turtleneck, but the word wasn't coming out. So we have paper and markers always readily available. And so she wrote turtle, and she showed me this gesture. And I said, are you telling me about a turtleneck? And yeah, that was the message. So again, encourage those existing skills. If someone has strengths with writing, then make sure to have that paper, especially in places where you're naturally having conversations, like at a coffee table or maybe the dinner table. Again, encourage gesturing if that comes naturally to the person. Focus on the person and not the PPA. Don't correct or challenge the story of your loved one. And this one's really important. Talk, don't test. Even well-intended family members can unintentionally add communication pressure in conversation. And I have a couple examples to show you about that. So for example, a very well-intended supportive spouse, you might notice your spouse is withdrawing from conversation with friends, and you really want to encourage your spouse to talk. So you might say, tell them about what our daughter is doing. Oh, come on, Susan, tell them what Susan's doing. Again, very well intended, but that can add communication pressure and make it even more difficult to engage in the conversation. So instead, include the person in the conversation. This might mean slowing down the pace of the conversation. It might mean also rephrasing or repeating things that were said. So in here, for this example, John said he lost his wife's audiobook. And it's funny because he'll never hear the end of it. So we're laughing about that joke. Include that person. You might need to slow things down or rephrase. This is another way, another example of ways to support a person with aphasia in conversation. This story comes from a woman with aphasia who was out in her front yard and talking with her neighbor and her daughter. And the woman with aphasia said, she has nice feathers. The wrong word came out. And that person with aphasia was mortified. She was worried the neighbor might think she was actually insulting her daughter by saying that. So we know with aphasia that sometimes the wrong word comes out. And so if you're the partner, the communication partner, or you're with this person with aphasia, instead of correcting her and say, oh no, you didn't mean feathers, you meant her hair. Instead of doing that, you can repeat it and use the correct word naturally in the sentence. Like, yeah, I love her hair too. Because what happened with this woman with aphasia is she said, I don't talk to neighbors anymore. I can't. I'm so embarrassed the wrong word is going to come out. And what would people think of me? Because they can't see my aphasia. So again, just repeat it back in more of an implicit kind of way. They don't need to be explicitly corrected when the wrong word comes out. Our colleague Ola created this wonderful video modeled after a demonstration created by the Aphasia Institute in Toronto to imagine what it might be like living with aphasia. So I'm going to pause my screen here and share this video with you. Can you imagine what it's like? You've used language your whole life, but now you struggle to understand. And at times, it's like someone Oh, sorry. In this demonstration, we'll listen to Ola tell us a story in Polish.
Kiedy wczoraj wracałam w nocy do domu, złapałam gumę. Komórka mi zsiadła i nie miałam jak zadzwonić na pomoc. Nie wiem, jak wymienić oponę i jeszcze padał deszcz. Nie chciałam wychodzić z samochodu.
What did you understand? What could she do to help you understand?
Kiedy wczoraj wracałam w nocy do domu, złapałam gumę. Komórka mi siadła i nie miałam jak zadzwonić na pomoc. Nie wiem, jak wymienić oponę i jeszcze padał deszcz. Nie chciałam wychodzić z samochodu.
You can read those words, right? But the words are meaningless if you don't know the language. Let's see what you can understand if she adds some more meaningful gestures.
Kiedy wczoraj wracałam do domu, złapałam gumę. Komórka nie pracowała i nie miałam jak zadzwonić na pomoc. Nie wiem, jak wymienić oponę i jeszcze padał deszcz. Nie chciałam wychodzić z samochodu.
So when she combines those meaningful gestures with drawings, let's see if you can understand the whole story.
Kiedy wczoraj wracałam w nocy do domu, złapałam gumę. Komórka mi siadła i nie miałam jak zadzwonić na pomoc. Nie wiem jak wymienić oponę. Nie wiem. A padał jeszcze deszcz. Ja nie chciałam wychodzić z samochodu i zostałam w samochodzie.
For someone with aphasia, using supports in conversation, like those meaningful gestures, drawing, writing the keywords, can help them to understand. Okay. Just a second here. Sorry. Thanks. Hopefully you can see my screen again there.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. You can see the right screen there, Paula-Jane?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So though we can't fully imagine what it's like living with aphasia, that video that Ola helped us create gives us a small taste of what it might be like. Unless you speak Polish, you likely couldn't understand a word that Ola was saying at first. Then as she added in more support, like writing the words, using meaningful, universal gestures, and really universal pictures too. The car there could look like a car in Europe or in Canada, Canada, anywhere. So she used those really meaningful gestures and story and drawings. Her story became much easier to understand. So with PPA, we want to adopt a multimodal approach for communicating. And what that means is we might use other ways to get the message in or out. So for example, the gesturing, writing, or for some people, this might mean using a communication book or a communication device. I'll speak briefly about something called augmentative and alternative communication, also heard or known as AAC. AAC are tools that add or replace a person's speech. It can be strategies to help someone become a more effective communicator. And again, maintaining their social self for as long as possible. So there are many different forms of AAC, but here's an example. All of our clients are given an aphasia wallet card. It can be as simple as this, where you've defined, I have PPA, and I find it difficult to understand, to speak or read and write. And have some useful tips about what helps in conversation. So ways you can help me. Speak slowly. Use simple sentences. Repeat or rephrase what you said. Give me time to understand. Give me time to respond. For some people, it might be writing down the main words or the key words. On the back of these aphasia wallet cards, we will often write the person's name and their address, because though someone with aphasia knows their name and their address, for some people, even those words are difficult to come out. We might also write the name of a caregiver or a spouse and their phone number so that they can be reached in case of emergency. So this kind of card is really useful and helpful. This is another example of an AAC support. This is a no-tech paper-based communication aid that we call a topics board. So this is actually one of my topic boards, and these are things that I like to talk about, just as an example. So my family, I like to talk about current events. My friends, I like to talk about my work and my home, and then plans and things that are coming up. So this is highly individualized and highly personalized. And we would actually put the pictures from the person with aphasia in here and things that they like to talk about. It can really help someone with PPA initiate conversation, because often clients will tell us, I'm always the one listening because it's harder for me to get into the conversation. So a topics board like this can allow someone to say, hey, I'd like to talk about this. And they can point to one of the things if the words aren't coming out easily.
So our quality of life is largely dependent on our connection with others. However, it can be hard to maintain that connection when verbal communication is affected, like when you have PPA. So as a result, sometimes relationships can change when someone has PPA. Often, people with PPA can easily become isolated or avoided by those around them. And that's often because friends and family may fear not knowing how to communicate with that person. So this, again, is a quote from one of our members. And this person says, I feel alone even when I'm with my family. I can't listen fast enough. And this, or something like this, is what we hear often from our group members. So many of them say, I don't feel like I'm included in the conversation anymore. Or when my family gathers or we go to social outings, I'm there, but people aren't really talking to me, or they're not trying to help me to talk to them. And so many times people will withdraw into the background or avoid social settings altogether. So studies have shown that the most difficult aspect of caregiving is the loss of relationship and communication. So even more significant than dealing with someone's memory problems, aggressive behavior, need for supervision, or even helping with personal care needs. This was rated higher. So it's very significant. And we also know from studies that communication problems are correlated with problem behaviors and burden of stress. So it's important to recognize and remember that all behavior is communication. So even when people aren't talking, when the words aren't coming out maybe, they are still expressing themselves, maybe in a non-verbal way. And when it's hard for people with aphasia and with PPA to get their words out, or if they feel like they're not being heard or understood, that can lead to frustration and sometimes can lead to problematic or challenging behaviors. And that in turn places a great deal of stress on caregivers. So as a person's skills and abilities change over time as the condition progresses, we as caregivers have to also change how we respond. And the key really is to use the intimate facts that we know about the person prior to their diagnosis so that we can tap into that. So, and if you don't know the person because you're not a family member, maybe you're a formal caregiver such as a personal support worker, then really try and learn from the family, who was this person? Who is this person? So what is their personality? What do they like to do? What are their hobbies and interests? And what are their values and beliefs? So you want to utilize what you know about that person to help you in your interactions with the person and to have better conversations. So for example, something Brittany said earlier, if a person is more of a morning person and you know that about them, then don't try having difficult or complex conversations later in the day because it's not going to go well. So have those serious, difficult conversations in the morning when it's going to be easier for the person. And I just want to share a brief story. So I had a phone call from a person who said that her and her daughter were really struggling because their mother had been recently diagnosed with PPA. And what they were finding difficult is their mother kept trying to exit the home. And consequently, the daughters were concerned. You know, they were worried that their mother might get lost or might get injured if she was out. And so they were trying to keep her safe. They had good intentions by wanting to keep her in the home. But by doing that, what was happening is they were encountering a lot of problematic behaviors with the mom because she had very limited words that she could say. So instead, she was expressing herself with a lot of yelling of sounds and a lot of shouting and aggressive behavior. So what I did is I kind of started exploring with the daughter, well, what was your mom like before this diagnosis? What did she like to do? And what was revealed is that the mom was not a homebody. She was someone who really liked to be outside. She liked to shop. She liked to be out walking, outdoors. And so I suggested to the daughters, they had to find a way to help their mother continue to do that, but in a safe way. And we discussed some strategies around that. So just one example of tapping into the intimate facts of a person. So what we really want to do as formal and informal caregivers, so whether you're a family member or a PSW, encourage those existing relationships the person with PPA has in their family and outside of their family, and provide them with meaningful engagement in activities. So help them to continue with participating in social groups and seeing friends. Help them to be involved in community activities. If they're part of a faith or religious community, help them to continue with that and also to engage in hobbies. However, as the relational connection is altered or changed as the condition progresses, it can really be important to engage in non-verbally demanding activities. So find ways for your loved one to do things that are not as demanding verbally and things you can do together. So some examples here are listening to music, going for walks, drawing or doing other forms of artwork, and puzzles. And again, as there are progressive changes in language and other areas of functioning due to the PPA, it may change the relationship between the person with PPA and those closest to them. So certainly the people most impacted are the ones that are living with the person with PPA, so often a spouse. And it's really important for that reason that both the person with PPA and the caregivers practice self-care. So learning how to nurture themselves and replenish their own energy supply so that they can continue to support their loved one. So a caregiver may find they have an increasing number of roles to play in the relationship. So maybe previously their spouse dealt with finances. However, now, they're required to take that on, or other things like cooking and household chores. So sometimes some caregivers have said to me, I feel more like a nurse or a personal support worker. I don't feel like a partner anymore or a spouse. And for this reason, we often recognize that the person with PPA is at risk for depression, but we also have to recognize that this is a risk for caregivers as well, as they are taking on more roles and the stress increases. We know that caregiving can be rewarding and bring people together. So often people have told me, I feel closer to my loved one because we're now spending more time together. Sometimes a person's personality shifts with the onset of certain conditions. And so sometimes people have said, my spouse is softer or gentler, or my parent is easier to actually interact with. So that can bring people together, which is wonderful, but it can also come with exhaustion, worry, and health consequences over time. So I have actually experienced in my work where a caregiver has passed away before the person with PPA. And that sometimes is the result of the significant stress and burden placed on the caregiver, especially if they're not seeking support and help. So inadequate resources can be stressful and take a toll, and that's why it's really critical to seek support for the person with PPA, but also for the caregiver as well.
The COVID-19 pandemic has actually shown us all the importance of social support and what happens when we're isolated from our friends and family in a way that maybe some of us had never experienced before. And what we know about isolation with aphasia is that individuals with aphasia are actually living that isolation all day, every day, because of the communication impairment. We also know that prolonged isolation and loneliness can have the same negative health consequences as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It can cause problems with a person's emotional and physical health. So there's great value in building new relationships, especially with those who really get it. So like Paula-Jane said earlier, we encourage people with PPA and aphasia to seek out community supports through programs like a community aphasia program or through the Alzheimer Groupe to make connections with people who are going through something similar. Also can be an opportunity to seek out advice and emotional support from others who have traveled a similar road. So Paula-Jane certainly finds this in her caregiver support groups, that people say, it's actually saved me a lot of time and energy because there was someone there to tell me about what they went through. And now I can, follow a similar path and get that support outside of the family even too. We encourage our clients to seek out support and prepare early. And what that support can look like is communication support from a speech language pathologist. So find if there's a PPA group at your local community aphasia program. You might have some additional support and resources. I know that many of the aphasia programs in Ontario and likely in other provinces as well now have conversation groups specific to people living with PPA. Also, incredibly important is seeking out the social and mental health support from a social worker. Just like Paula-Jane mentioned earlier, she supports the people with PPA, but also their family and caregivers, their spouses, their children, because aphasia is a family problem and it affects everyone.
So we also know from the studies and evidence that activity-based programs, especially ones that are structured and meaningful, may provide improved quality of life for those living with frontotemporal lobar degeneration, sorry, I'm tongue-tied, which of course PPA falls under that umbrella. So when we say structured and meaningful, we don't mean just activities for the sake of it, but if someone responds well to music or used to play an instrument, they might do well in a music therapy program or group. If someone likes gardening, they might really enjoy some type of horticultural group. So although these programs may not target the treatment of language, they do provide other important benefits, including cognitive stimulation, they reduce isolation, and they can improve mood. And I know from my own experience that people that seek out these activities who have PPA, they seem to do better and they seem to maintain their communication skills longer than people who don't seek out these other groups or activities.
So we have a list of some community resources, such as the Alzheimer Society, the Alzheimer Groupe, like AGI, who's brought us here today, the Aphasia Institute, and other local community aphasia programs, the Association of Frontal-Temporal Dementia, Théâtre Aphasique, the Quebec Association for People with Aphasia, and the Quebec Association of Speech Language Pathologists and Audiologists. So look to some of those resources, and we can share those with the coordinators at AGI too, if you're looking for some additional supports after this presentation. So we'd like to end today with a video that was created by some of our clients with aphasia and PPA. But before we do that, we just wanted to say thank you so much for having us here today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the privilege. We're always happy to talk about aphasia and primary progressive aphasia and help create awareness, hopefully.
Can you see that video there?
Yep.
Thanks.
Oh,
you so much, Brittany and Paula-Jane, for that wonderful presentation. I got goosebumps watching that last video, as I'm sure many of the people who are watching it did. You know, I really appreciate the presentation because a lot of what you said is a philosophy of AGI as well. You know, looking at the strengths of the person, looking at what the person can still do, recognizing that there's more to, you know, you have to go deeper and recognize what, who that person is and how to support that person in order for them to succeed and to feel comfortable and to feel competent, as you said, purposeful and things like that. Do you have the statistics about how many people with dementia have either some type of aphasia or PPA? I don't have that.
No, I don't actually. I know the statistics for stroke, but not for dementia and PPA. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but I can tell you a lot of the strategies that you mentioned. You know, going slow, you know, using gestures, giving the person time to speak, giving them the repeating back what they said, but using perhaps the word that they're using, like the feather, I think it was, in the hair. Those are all strategies that can be applied as well for people living with Alzheimer's who have difficulty with aphasia. So I appreciate all of that. Let me see, there's a question. So in terms of aphasia, in the later stages, would the same strategies apply in terms of communication?
Sorry, so say with PPA or with aphasia?
Yeah. Would the same strategies apply in terms of giving them the gestures? Do you find one more successful than another, or does it depend on the person?
It's totally dependent on the person. So we, you know, everyone is so unique that for some people, they can write really, really well, even at the point where they're not able to speak verbally. And so we encourage them to have a journal and practice that every day, and have paper and a whiteboard maybe at the dinner table to write the words. So it really is unique and unique to every person. For some people, gesturing comes really, really naturally. So we'll say encourage that. But if gesturing doesn't come naturally, or they might be having trouble with that, then don't try to teach that as maybe a new skill. Maybe look to something else that they can do really well.
Okay. And in terms of letting friends and neighbors, you know, I think that's a big thing. You know, that's where the withdrawal comes from, the embarrassment. What do you think, what would you say to someone if it was your neighbor and someone in your family had PPA? What would you tell them how to support that person?
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's hard. It's hard to sometimes maintain some of those connections, but it's really important to really encourage those. And, you know, we have many people in our program that are very private about their diagnosis. And I think because of the association with dementia, there's still that stigma. Some of them are quite young. And so they worry what people are going to think if they say, I have PPA. And so they keep it to themselves. And, you know, that's a personal choice we have to respect, and we work with that. But it can make it really difficult then to get the support you need, whether that's support from family or friends, right? Because and early on, it may not be necessary to share. It might not even be noticeable. But as it progresses, and the person may need more support with communication, it really becomes difficult if the person is not, you know, willing or wanting to share about their diagnosis. And I feel like if existing relationships are too hard, and sometimes they are, that's where we try and find other ways of helping people to connect. So that's why in our program, we try and find ways of connecting people through our peer one-to-one support program. So maybe, you know what, their friends have fallen off, or they don't feel comfortable with their, you know, previous friends, but still important to have social connections. So we try and find ways of still, you know, developing and encouraging connections with people through our program.
Okay. And you mentioned something about the support group program on Zoom. Has that been successful?
Yeah, actually,
actually.
very, yeah.
Yeah.
And in some ways better, right? Because people don't have to travel to a specific location, right? And so I have people in my virtual PPA support group from Brampton, from Burlington, from Oakville, from all over the place. And it would be hard for us to accommodate people from all those different areas if we were in person at one location. And same with my caregiver support group. I'm actually finding in some ways the attendance has been better virtually. I mean, we know it's not suitable for everyone, but I feel like the people who are attending are still feeling like it's been helpful for them in terms of getting that support and maintaining connections.
Okay. And the support groups that you were referring to, are they separated? So you have a caregiver support group and then a group for people with PPA, is that it?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's right. So, and the reason why we did that, so some programs that run, PPA support, have PPA support services, they run combined programs for the person with PPA and caregivers. And I can see the benefits to that. However, if the person with PPA wants to talk about some of those difficult feelings and emotions that maybe they don't want to share with their family members or their, caregiver, having a group just for them provides them with that safe space to do that. And same with the caregivers, right? They need to feel like they can express whatever the feelings are, ugly, whatever, feelings they're having that are very honest and real. We need to allow them to have a space to do that. So I feel like and sometimes I do combine sessions that are more informational in nature, but for the most part, the support groups are separate.
Yeah, I see a lot of people in the chat. They're asking about whether or not people from Quebec could come. Just to let you know that AGI does have support groups, but we're talking a lot about dementia communication best practices. But if you're looking for something specifically related to PPA, is that something that you've been open to or that you would consider if someone from Quebec could join?
At this point, there is an association for speech language pathologists in Quebec. And so we have to follow the rules and regulations of the governing body of the province that we're in. And so unfortunately, I think the answer would be that they do have to find services within Quebec unless we were able to get some sort of agreement between the two. But I think right now, unfortunately, unless the person is in Ontario, specifically for our groups, then they likely can't access ours. But I'm very happy to help people. Megan, you're welcome to connect people with me directly. And we are very well connected, certainly in Ontario, but can find those individuals and groups. AGI, I'm sure, is a wonderful resource as well for connecting people, but we're very happy to help you find those resources in your area.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a language barrier in Quebec.
Yeah.
So that can be challenging, but if you call AGI, we can do our best to connect you to the appropriate resources that you need. So I do want to thank you very much. I'm just aware of the time. It's been extremely insightful, and I'm hoping that those who did attend were able to gain some practical strategies, or it just reassured them that they are doing the right steps with their loved ones and supporting them in this way. So thank you so much. The recording will be sent out to you most likely tomorrow. And if anyone has any questions or needs access to the resources, please don't hesitate to call AGI and we'll connect you.
Thanks so much, Megan.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Megan.
Have a great
Thank you,
day.
everyone, for joining.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.